Hello there. I've gotten in the habit of telling you what date and time I'm recording, but I don't like to have a set rote routine that I just rattle off. There's not necessarily anything wrong with it, but it's not my style. So I'm not going to tell you that today. And, you'll be watching this. At the very least, this is Monday night. So this will, at the very least, not go online for another 6 days, because I'll upload the next sippin' and talkin' video on Sunday, and yes, that's what this is, sippin' and talkin'. I'm going to pour some whiskey, and then I'm going to, as briefly as I possibly can, remind y'all of why I drink whiskey, and then I'll tell you why I'm doing that. I'm having to fight the overhead light. It's trying to wash out everything here on the right side of the setup. And you can even see how milky this looks. It's not really, that's what it actually looks like. It's a Sagamore Spirit Double Oak Rye. And I've had to scooch and I've had to scooch. And I'm not going to rearrange everything on the table to make it better. And I don't know how I got on that. How did I come to drink whiskey in the first place? Well, back in 2020, it was either late 2020 or early 2021, I learned that on my daddy's side, I don't know anything on my mama's side further back than her mama, my grandma. But I learned that on my daddy's side, we go back to 1799 in Henry County, Virginia. And come the war, we were in Buncombe County, North Carolina. I don't recollect when we moved. I've got all sorts of information, but I have a genealogical mind like I have 29 hands. But come the war, we were in Buncombe County, North Carolina. 4 of my ancestors fought in North Carolina regiments for the Confederacy. And I'm not going to get on that subject, but I will tell you, I'm not one bit ashamed of them. I'm proud of them. And if you really want to have a serious discussion on the Confederate States of America, we can do that via email. The comments is not conducive to that. But after the war, they moved over into eastern Kentucky, if I remember right, Clay County. I wouldn't want to swear to it, but western North Carolina and eastern Kentucky is right in the heart of moonshine country. That's up in the hills and the mountains and the valleys and the hollows of Appalachia, where they have been making corn liquor for 300 years or more. And for the longest time, it was perfectly legal. It was just as legal to make liquor from your corn as it was to make ham from your pigs. And then along come the war, and to finance his invasion of a foreign country, Abraham Lincoln got Congress to pass a liquor excise tax, and it is still with us to this day, almost 200 years later. But knowing my daddy's people lived there, it was a pretty good bet that they drank liquor even if they didn't make it. And for all I know, some of them did make corn liquor. Well, knowing that, I got curious as to what it tastes like. I still don't know. The closest I have ever come is Buffalo Trace White Dog from their mash bill #1, which isn't bad. And then, what did they call it? Mark and Digger's Mountain Legacy Corn Liquor, I believe is what they called it. Or corn whiskey, I'm not sure. And it was drinkable, I'll say that for it. And it was the hottest stuff I've ever had. It was only 120 proof, but it scorched me more than 130 plus proof that I've had. Well, I got curious and I bought what the label claimed was moonshine. I later found out it wasn't. What they call grain neutral spirit, vodka, proof down to 80. And while I was at it, I got me a little bottle of Jim Beam White Label and a little bottle of Jack Daniel's Black Label. I said, I'll just prove to myself once and for all while I'm here that whiskey tastes bad. Now those two are barley whiskey. They're 80 proof, which is the bare minimum for whiskey in the United States. If something calls itself whiskey but it's under 80 proof, legally it's in the wrong. But I found out that while they weren't anything to write home about, they didn't taste like turpentine. And so I went from there, and now I'm drinking Sagamore Spirit Double Oak Rye Whiskey and enjoying the living daylights out of it. Now, why did all that come up? Well, I just finished watching a video by Donnie Laws, and if you have any interest at all in history or in the South or specifically Appalachia, I highly recommend you subscribe to his channel. Just look up Donnie, D-O-N-N-I-E, Laws. And he's just an old country boy, retired coal miner, and he talks about different aspects of his life there in Appalachia in eastern Tennessee. That absolutely does not taste like turpentine. That's good stuff, Maynard. But tonight's video, Donnie was talking about how the old ways and the old places are disappearing in Appalachia. And he showed all sorts of pictures he's took himself of houses, church meeting houses, school houses, stores, all sorts of things that are long abandoned. The families all died off or they've all moved away. Nobody lives there anymore. Nobody cares anymore. And it's all crumbling back into the ground. Or, and to my mind this is much worse, they brought in the bulldozers and they're smashing it all down, the houses and the woods and the fields, and they're building these cookie cutter museums that people call homes. Not even homes, they're saying homes, because they're talking so blame fast. And they're not even homes, people, they're houses. I have a home. I've never owned a house in my life. Doesn't look like I ever will. I have had a home in an apartment for most of my life. But I've had a home. So that building you buy to live in, it's a house. And if you don't have a home, buying a house won't give you one. But all this stuff is decaying away or they're smashing it flat and building these cookie cutter monstrosities that are butt ugly. And you look at one, you can't tell whether you're in Paducah, Kentucky or Ponderay, Idaho. Might as well be LA or Chicago as Atlanta. And you go inside, the floor plan is all the same. And yeah, I know there have always been tract houses. You know, you go way back, I think it might have been in the 40s, but maybe the 50s, where they had Levittown up in Pennsylvania. Cookie cutter, stamp, 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 stamp. But these houses, they resist all efforts at individuality. You know, somebody's been living in these houses on the block for 20 years, and they all look the same. You could take a garden hose and wash off every little bit of individuality in 10 minutes. And that's what is going into even the reaches of Appalachia. I'm going to try something here. That might be a tad bit better. I don't want to slice off the top of my head. They call it progress. And I understand that things change. The houses that I'm talking about, which are slowly falling back into the soil, are not the first things that were there. Before the white men built frame houses, they were building log cabins. And before the white men came, there were Indians with whatever they built, long houses or what have you. I'm not any kind of an expert. Excuse me, tried to go down the wrong way. And one tribe of Indians would drive out another, and that other tribe would be building things somewhat different. So things do change, I understand that. But not all change is good. Not all change is necessary. Some change is not just unnecessary, but bad. You know, they say, don't fear change. I found out something. Somebody tells you don't be afraid to change. What he's saying is that the change that's coming is going to be unpleasant. Not just because it's different, but because it is actively unpleasant. You know, people welcome change when it's good change. You know, if you're trying to dig a ditch in caliche, and your pickaxe is blunt from bashing into that stuff, and somebody comes along with a backhoe and rips out the ditch in a day, that's change you like. If you've had to go out to the spring house to get cold milk, you welcome the change of a refrigerator. And probably your first refrigerator would be a gas refrigerator, and the guy would come around and fill up your tank every, 2 weeks, month, what have you. And yes, there have been gas refrigerators running on what everybody today calls propane. I grew up calling it bottled gas. And then when the electric came in, people welcomed that change, because now they could heat their houses and cool their houses, run their refrigerator, all that more easily. So people don't automatically resist all change. It's change that is destructive, that is bad, that is unpleasant, that we resist. And that's why these people are always preaching, don't be afraid of change, because what they're proposing we're not going to like, not because it's change, but because it's bad, because it makes things harder, because it takes away some of what life should be about. And I don't believe Donnie Laws wants to do away with electricity and bottled gas and all the modern conveniences. I don't have any question on that. I don't. I like having a furnace to blow heat when it gets down around 0 here in Albuquerque. I like having a car to take me to work, because I work 5 miles from here. I could walk it. I wouldn't want to. And it would really make for a long day. But not all change is good, and change which flattens a whole way of life, grades the hills and the valleys and the rises, grades it board flat, and puts up a cookie cutter street of humps that are more like mausoleums for dead people than houses for living people. That is bad change. That is change that nobody with a brain wants. And it's easy, I know, to talk about the good old days. A loaf of bread only cost a quarter. Yeah, well, yeah, you was making, what, $1 an hour back then? Things balance out. When prices were lower, so were pay scales. I can remember when a typical suburban house ran about $40,000. You can buy a car for that now. But the pay was less. Somebody who made as much as he does now, if he'd made it back then, he wouldn't be buying a $40,000 house. He'd be buying a mansion. You know, a quart of oil cost less, but the time it took to earn that quart of oil paid less too. My foster father used to talk about moving clear across the state, I believe it was Indiana, I'm not sure, for a nickel an hour raise. Well, to us, a nickel an hour is nothing. But when he did that, it was pretty significant. I remember when he bought our Mazda station wagon. $10,000. I could not believe that. I thought my parents were making it up, because I'd never heard of a normal everyday car costing that much. But that's what it cost. But the pay was less. You know, we think of $10,000 now as dirt cheap. But back then, wages were lower, so the lower price was still something you had to finance. So I understand that the good old days were not perfect. But even in the cities, except in certain bad parts of town, you could leave your door unlocked and go off all day and not have to worry about somebody walking in and taking stuff. You could leave your car unlocked in L.A. Parents would tell their kids, go out and play and don't come back till supper time. And the kids would be gone for hours and hours, and the parents had no worries. Partly because it was safe to roam the neighborhood, and partly because the other parents were keeping an eye out, and if your kid did something stupid, you'd get a whooping. That kid would get a whooping, and when he got home, he'd get another whooping. The neighborhood was watching out. I'm going over to Jimmy's. Okay, don't come back till I call you. 4 hours later, come back home, Robbie. And not a qualm. The change that we have seen since then has not been good change. Now you can be walking down the street, an adult, innocent as can be, and some dude will come up and punch you right in the face. You can be riding a train, minding your own business, and somebody will stab you 3 times in the neck and murder you right there, and nobody does a thing to stop the criminal. We have changed so much that a man who on the subway protects the other passengers from a raving, violent maniac goes on trial. You can't tell me things have changed better. They've changed worse. And the worse is out in the country just as surely as it is in the city. I can't believe it's as bad as mystery novels make it out to be, but there is a meth problem in Appalachia. And there is distressing poverty in Appalachia. You want to talk about white privilege? You go to Appalachia and you see how some of them people live to this day in 2026. Working 2 or 3 jobs and barely able to keep a roof over the kids' heads. Or hunting for work and not finding it. And nobody else around has any money because the government's taxed the living daylights out of them. White privilege in this country today means you have the privilege of having everybody be racist against you. That's not good change. And yes, there have been some good changes. In my lifetime, I have seen Jim Crow die and wither and fade away. The black laws the carpetbaggers brought down from the North after the war and imposed upon us are gone. And that's a good thing. But as that has happened, racism against white people has risen, and that's bad change. Things aren't the way they used to be. And some of it's good, but some of it is bad. In the 30 years I've been in Albuquerque, here in the Northeast Heights, it's gone from where I could go out at 2 in the morning and walk for an hour or so and never fear any harm, to where now I don't go any further than the dumpster after dark because of the riffraff roaming everywhere up here in the Heights. Bad change. Well, if I have depressed you sufficiently, or angered you, and you might be mad at me for mentioning some of this, I don't know. It is 24 minutes and counting. I did not intend to be this long. I say that every time, just about. But whatever there is to complain about in this world, He is risen. He rules. He reigns. Nothing happens outside of His control, which means it will all work out in the end for His people. And I got good whiskey, and that is not chopped liver. Cheers.